Okay, so get ready to dive deep today because we are looking at how the European film industry is being reshaped by the digital world. And let me tell you, this is a big deal with huge financial
It
implications.
really is. It's like watching an old system trying to keep up with these massive waves of digital disruption. Streaming services have completely changed how film releases work, shaken up the traditional model of what we call release windows, and the effects are everywhere.
And just as a quick reminder for anyone who's not familiar with the term release windows, it's that old system where a film would first premiere in theaters, then you'd have to wait for the home video release, and finally it would end up on TV. But the digital world doesn't wait for anyone, does it?
No, not really. The internet's all about speed and global reach. It really challenges the traditional idea of territoriality, where right shoulders used to control distribution in different regions to maximize their profits.
So are we headed towards a world where audiences everywhere expect to access films simultaneously instead of these staggered releases?
That's exactly what's happening. And for European cinema, which has always been rooted in theatrical releases and carefully managed distribution, this is a huge shift, a real challenge.
And an expensive one, too. I read somewhere that the European audiovisual sector lost a whopping 7 billion euros in revenue just during the pandemic.
Yeah, it just shows how much financial pressure is out there. With cinemas closed, the industry lost that key theatrical window and the money it brings in.
It really underscores how massive this disruption is. So how are European countries responding to all this? Is there a united front?
That's where things get really interesting. Europe is far from unified when it comes to film releases. Every country has its own history, its own set of regulations, its own approach to balancing the interests of filmmakers, distributors, and of course the audience.
So there's no easy solution here, more like a puzzle with tons of pieces.
Exactly. And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to try to solve that puzzle, explore the different regulatory landscapes across European film distribution. It's a bit like, imagine you're trying to launch this big marketing campaign across Europe,
Yeah.
but each country you go to has different rules about advertising, different languages, obviously, and even just different ways of looking at things, different cultural sensitivities. That's kind of what film distributors are dealing with these days.
A real maze of marketing rules. So it's not just about putting films on platforms, it's about understanding all these different regulations and cultural nuances.
Yeah, you got to take France as an example. They've had this system for a long time based on something called the Cinema Code, which dictates things like how long a film has to be shown in actual theaters before it can be released on other platforms. These release windows are super important for how they fund their films, protecting both cinemas and the whole financial structure of French filmmaking.
So even with streaming services becoming so powerful, tradition and local context still matter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even France, which is really known for its traditional film culture, even they're adapting. They recently made changes to their cinema code, shortening those release windows to keep up with how the media landscape is evolving.
It's a tough balance, isn't it? Trying to protect their cinematic heritage while also acknowledging how people actually consume content these days. What about other countries in Europe? Are we seeing similar things happening?
Yeah, there's definitely movement across Europe to shorten those release windows.
Mm.
Some countries are making it a law. Others are relying on agreements within the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of back and forth about the best way to do it.
I'm guessing the streaming giants are a big part of what's driving these changes. Are they the ones calling all the shots now?
Well, they definitely have a lot of influence. Their whole model depends on getting more subscribers globally, and that means getting content out there fast. But it's not as simple as saying it's the streaming giants against everyone else. There are actually some interesting partnerships and alliances forming where traditional studios and distributors are finding ways to work with these new players.
So a bit of a power struggle, but also some potential for collaboration. That's an interesting dynamic to watch unfold.
It is. There's a lot at stake here. On the one hand, there's this great potential for a more diverse and accessible film landscape. Smaller productions, independent films, they suddenly have a way to reach a global audience.
And for those of us who love film, that's really exciting. More choices, more voices, more stories from all over the world. But I imagine there are some downsides too, right?
Of course. One big concern is what this means for independent cinemas, those special places for real film lovers. They depend a lot on those exclusive theatrical releases. And then there's the whole question of preserving culture. Could this rush towards globalized content end up making cinema too much the same everywhere, making it harder for unique national voices to break through?
That raises some really important questions about the future of film. It's not just about how we watch, but what we watch and what gets lost or found in this new landscape.
And that's where things get really interesting.
So we've talked about all the challenges and the exciting opportunities and these big questions about what's next for European film,
Yeah.
where do we even begin to unpack the future? What's coming down the pipeline?
Well, let's just say predicting the future of entertainment is a bit of a gamble.
That's putting it lightly.
But if you look at where things are headed right now, I think it all boils down to one word: flexibility. Filmmakers and distributors, they're going to have to be adaptable, open to new ideas, willing to try out different release strategies and see what works.
So instead of a one-size-fits-all approach, it's more about creating custom-made solutions for distributing films.
Exactly. A film might have a big premiere in theaters in one country, go straight to a streaming service in another, and then find success with some kind of mix in a third. It all comes down to local preferences, those regulations we talked about, and of course how audiences are actually consuming content.
That sounds like a logistical nightmare for the people managing all these releases.
This definitely adds layers of complexity. But with that complexity comes opportunity. Look at the rise of all these niche streaming services. They focus on specific interests like documentaries or foreign films. It's a whole new way for filmmakers to reach the audience they're looking for.
So there's hope for those smaller productions trying to stand out in a sea of blockbusters.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And this is where understanding the little differences between each market becomes super important. Data analytics, researching what audiences want, local partnerships, those are going to be essential tools for navigating this fragmented landscape.
It sounds like the industry is moving away from that one-size-fits-all model towards something much more nuanced, much more targeted. What does this mean for us, the viewers at home?
In short, more choices. We're entering this on-demand world where content is becoming more and more tailored to individual tastes. What this could look like is a more personalized viewing experience. Algorithms suggesting films based on the languages you prefer, what you've watched before even your location.
So it's kind of like having your own personal film curator right at your fingertips.
Exactly. But even with all this choice, new challenges pop up. How do we cut through the noise and find those hidden gems? How do we avoid getting stuck in a bubble, only seeing things we already like? These are questions we'll all have to consider as viewers.
It's a really exciting time for film with so much happening so quickly. As we wrap up this deep dive, any final thoughts for our listeners who want to stay ahead of the curve?
Stay curious. Explore those niche streaming platforms we talked about. Seek out films from different cultures, different languages. The future of European film is all about diversity, innovation, and being open to the unexpected.
I love that. And on that note, we'll bring this exploration of European film's digital evolution to a close. If you're interested in digging deeper into the business side of media and entertainment, be sure to check out Gröngulen's website. They've got a ton of insights and analysis for industry pros and film buffs alike. Until next time, happy watching, everyone!